Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this Ask Microsoft Anything for Windows Autopilot. My name is Joe Lurie. I am a PM on the Intune team, but I'm also the least important person in this room. I'm here with my friends Maggie and Rob. And before I have them introduce themselves, I just want to let you know things are uh, a little stalled today. It's kind of slow. You can see me moving, a little broken up. Our computers are waking up this early Monday morning. I'm going to let my friends introduce themselves. Maggie, we'll start with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Maggie Dakiva. I'm a product manager for Windows Autopilot and looking forward to hearing all your great questions.
And Rob. Rob?
Hey everyone, I don't know if you can hear me. My internet is starting to phase as well. My name is Rob York. I am a product manager architect on the Intune team responsible for all things Windows and desktop.
Thanks so much. Again, I apologize. I hope that our internet, all of us, like we're all in different areas of the country too, or different areas of the world even, but we're all having that same issue. So let's go to our first question. Our first question came from Tech Community. And I'm going to ask Maggie, but I think Rob can also add some useful comments here. From Tech Community, can you all talk about the differences between traditional autopilot, device prep, and use case scenarios for using one over the other? And then there's a follow-up question, which I'll get to afterwards. And this kind of gets into, I was actually going to start with this. I've seen in the media and I've seen on all the socials where people are calling it Autopilot V1 and Autopilot V2, and we're not supposed to. It's not really V2 of Autopilot. So Maggie, can you talk about the differences between traditional Autopilot and Autopilot device prep and when I might use one over the other? Because there's still reasons to be using traditional Autopilot. So talk to us about some of those differences and why I might use one over the other.
Yeah, sure. That's a very popular question we get. So, Autopilot device preparation is, in many ways, a re-architecture of the original Autopilot, where we took a lot of the feedback we've been getting over the years, and we moved to an approach where we made some very foundational changes that help us have a better base to build upon. So, Autopilot device prep will get richer with more of the scenarios that you're looking for. At this time, it supports user-driven mode and entry-joined devices. So this is the recommendation for scenarios to use it with. I would say if you have not used Autopilot today, or if you're just starting your cloud-native journey, go with device preparation. This is where you see more features built on top of in the next few years. This is where we do more of our improvements as well. There's more reliability and consistency of the experience. Things are coming down in a more controlled way. So you'll start seeing how much easier it is to make that one work as opposed to the original Autopilot, which might have required some tweaks here and there based on your custom configurations. Now, that being said, for those of you who are still looking for more flexibility in the types of scenarios, I know many of you need still pre-provisioning. Many of you need things like co-management, self-deploying modes for certain scenarios. You'll still have great value from Windows Autopilot. So if you're just starting your journey and you're looking for those modes, I would say don't wait for Autopilot device prep to have those. Start with Autopilot today. It's still obviously fully supported. It's still a great solution we have out there. Just keep in mind that any future improvements will slowly be coming more to Autopilot device prep side as opposed to Autopilot.
Thanks, Maggie. And another important distinction is sovereign clouds or our government clouds now can use Autopilot, right, using the device prep process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out.
And there was a follow-up question on how our customers are buying their devices. When they buy a device, they ask their OEM reseller to upload the hashes into the Autopilot service. And this isn't something, the Autopilot service or the hash for the devices isn't used in device prep. So the follow-up question that we got on Tech Community is, will resellers have that tenant info eventually? Will resellers that have tenant info eventually be able to enroll devices in device prep during the purchase process?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So we do recognize there are scenarios where we need to know the device's identity in advance before the enrollment. that is required for unlocking some additional features that we have with Autopilot, don't yet have it with Autopilot device preparation. So there will be an option soon for your OEMs, resellers to also upload that device information. Can't share anything more specific than that yet, but be on the lookout towards the end of this year. You might hear more.
Thanks so much, Maggie. That actually might fall into another question I saw later on. I saw it in Tech Community, but we'll go back to Rob. Rob, welcome back. Do you have any comments or anything you want to add to what Maggie was talking about with device prep versus traditional Autopilot, when to use one over the other? Did you come back?
We see you move.
All right, maybe not. So we'll get on to the next question. We have a question that also came in on Tech Community from, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but Gail on Tech Community. While I've used a script to deploy applications only when in Autopilot, and I've created my own script to only deploy applications during pre-provisioning in Autopilot, will we ever add native capabilities in Intune or in Autopilot, such as a checkbox for apps to only install during Autopilot or pre-provisioning, or even just to ensure the app installs only when Autopilot is completed? So what are your thoughts, Maggie, on deploying apps only during the Autopilot process? Is that something that you've heard before, something that you've needed to work on?
That's an interesting feedback. I've heard for one-time setup steps that customers may need. It's not something we have in planning yet, but definitely something we can consider including later on.
Yeah, I'm actually interested if there's an application, and Gail, again, I apologize. If you could follow up in Tech Community in your post, I'm curious as to the scenario where you want the app installed during Autopilot, but existing devices don't actually need that application. I'd be interested to find a little bit more information on that as well. And I'm going to go back to a question that I did see on Tech Community. Thank you so much for pre-posting this. And this goes back to Maggie, what you were asking before, or you were saying before, we may see something later on. There was a question about Microsoft Ignite. And do we think we'll see some Autopilot sessions at Ignite? I think it might be too early to tell that, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is still being planned out. We're working with our marketing teams as well to figure out the schedule. Can't share anything yet because I don't know more yet, unfortunately, at this step.
Yeah, I'm one of those V teams. I do think it's too early to know that at this point. Yeah. As funny as that sounds, it's July and Ignite's only a few months away, and we're still working on that session schedule. All right, we got a question from Vishnav on LinkedIn. What's the future for Autopilot device prep in Windows 365 Enterprise? Currently, it's available only on Windows 365 Frontline. So Windows 365 Enterprise, what are we thinking about Autopilot device prep in those Windows 365 scenarios?
Yeah, so Windows 365 is actually a great example of one of the new partners that we're getting on board to Autopilot device prep only. It's our intention to support all of their SKUs or product lines. So Enterprise will be coming soon as well.
Great. And again,
it was the one that came out first, but we're planning to bring the other ones as well.
Yeah, and it's hard for us to give any kind of dates or any kind of, it's a roadmap item. We know that we're working on it. If you have other questions about anything new in Autopilot, for example, you can go to aka.ms. Autopilot new, I think is the link, and our producers can put that right up here. aka.ms Autopilot new, and you can see what's recently been released in Autopilot, or you can go to our roadmap page as well, which is aka.ms M365 roadmap. And again, our producers can put that up as well. aka.ms M365 roadmap. All right, so we have a question from Kamal on Tech Community, and I want to apologize for the producers for just throwing that out there without planning that one. A question from Kamal on Tech Community. In what scenarios do you recommend orgs use group tags when registering devices in Autopilot? When would I use a group tag versus not worrying about a group tag?
Well, this is an interesting question since there's been a recommendation that we've made. There's also been multiple uses we've seen customers use, but group tags was ultimately created as a way to give you more flexibility, more granularity in targeting before devices get enrolled. With group tags, you can group any registered devices in dynamic groups, and that dynamic group calculation will happen well in advance, so you don't have to wait during provisioning time, which is a known problem. And that's how your device can get granular configuration and get device targeted stuff before they even enroll. That is not necessary for device preparation, because there we've taken a different approach where we use something we call enrollment time grouping, where you can give us the group in advance. The device doesn't have to be in that group at all. And then we still get the configuration from that group, apply it during provisioning time, add the device to the group right at runtime. But if you're using traditional Autopilot where you have registered devices, we've seen customers assign the group tags, and primarily our recommendation there has been in order to put those devices in a dynamic group that can be targeted with apps and scripts that can come down during the provisioning process.
Thanks, Maggie. And I'm having again, as I start off with, my internet's kind of choppy right now, so I don't see any other questions. I know that I did see some questions before, so I'm trying to get back to that. So if I have a small pause while I'm searching for questions, that is why that's happening. We have a question from Stephen, who joins us a lot. So thank you, Stephen, for your support on Tech Community. What about the Config Manager agent? And I get this question a lot, even internally. How do you recommend we install the Configuration Manager client with Autopilot with device prep so we can then assign co-management policies? What's that order of installing the Configuration Manager client?
The short answer is we don't recommend you installing Autopilot device prep, since it's not a supported scenario today. So we can block people from doing custom things to install it, but it's not something that's supported today. The only way you could potentially install it is after you're outside of Autopilot device preparation, when you've gotten to the desktop and get it down that way. That would be a supported path. But installing during device prep at this time is not supported.
And when you say at this time, I'm guessing that's probably not a supported scenario that we will be looking for in the future either with device prep. And again, that's just my own guess. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's something that we might consider later, or?
It's not a priority right now, is what I'll say. Other modes are higher priority. Things like pre-provisioning self-deploying mode would definitely be high priority. They're more broadly used. I'm always thinking never say never, because things always get turned around. But at this time, it's not on our immediate roadmap, is what I can say.
Yep. All right. Thanks so much, Maggie. Maybe Rob can comment on this next question. If his camera's working, if his mic is working. Let's see. Rob, we got this question on Tech Community about the Windows out-of-box experience. And so is it planned to add custom UBI pages to provide onboarding information for a new employee? Just pages with text. I'm also interested in simplifying the process of adding a device to the Autopilot list, downloading the hardware hash, not using PowerShell, but for example, using a phone like Apple Business Cabinet, which that's actually new to me, Apple Business Cabinet, or the built-in GUI, the user interface within UBI. What are your thoughts on adding those custom UBI pages, onboarding the customer or the end user, or a better way or an easier way to upload that hash?
There's quite a lot to unpack in that question, and I think Maggie's probably going to be better to answer some of them. Custom UBI is an interesting one. We're kind of limited to what the platform offers. What we typically see customers do is add things after the user gets to the desktop, and one of the things we're striving is to have the UBI time be as short as possible. And Maggie and I talk about this all the time, but being able to put stuff more front and center, and front and center for the user once they get to the desktop, so that they have more awareness. But we do see a lot of customers use that for training and informational stuff that comes in. So we kind of think about the UBI process as just being those first few phases, but the provisioning can go well beyond the desktop, and it does mean that you can also get faster setup by moving as much as possible out of the actual UBI stage and have it just come down after the user's logged on. Really, it's the security apps and the productivity apps. We see customers that are as low as 15 minutes for their autopilot provisioning. And the way they achieve that is, okay, what are the things that the user absolutely needs, and what does the organization need very first, minute zero, put those into the ESP, have those blocking, and then have everything else follow down once the user's logged on and is jamming on their device.
Yeah, the rest of that is an easier way to upload the hash. For example, and the way I read this is today, if the hash has not been uploaded yet, I have to turn on the device, I have to launch a command prompt, download the PowerShell script, run the PowerShell script, upload the hash, then restart the device now that it's been uploaded. I think what they're looking for is just a quicker, easier way to do that, including maybe a QR code or something like that.
Yeah. In terms of getting
Maggie can speak to that a little bit.
In terms of getting that information uploaded directly in Intune, it is something we're exploring. I would say it's more something we're exploring for device preparation at this point than outbound with registered devices. I'll look into Apple Business Cabinet as well, because I wasn't familiar with how that works too. But the goal is to have an easier option where you just scan the information from the device, upload, and you're good to go.
And do you have any comments on the custom Ubi pages, Maggie? Anything you want to add to what Rob had already said?
I mean, I think Rob said most of it. I think there's just a misconception that things have to be necessarily in Ubi. This is more of a technology versus the experience. I think what customers are looking for is the overall onboarding experience. And because today we don't have a post-Ubi alternative yet, that's why they ask about the Ubi experience. But ultimately, our goal is let's not keep the user stranded in Ubi for a long time. Let's give all of that space post-Ubi. Also, because if you think about it, if that text contains some guidance on the user has to go to a page and do some stuff, you can do that at the desktop, not in Ubi, right?
Totally makes sense. Thanks so much. And great question. Thank you so much for posting that question. Michael in Tech Community is asking about moving from the traditional autopilot to autopilot device prep. How can we stop users from setting up devices with personal accounts on the screen that says, how would you like to set up this device? So when they get to that screen, we don't want our users typing in their Gmail accounts at that point just yet. Yeah. How do we prevent them from setting up devices using personal accounts?
Yeah, so today the only way would be to use an Enterprise Edition, Windows Enterprise Edition SKU. In the future, we'll have that capability. It's something we're working on. Can't share any timelines yet, obviously, but that's something that's coming. Until that is there, you have to use Enterprise SKU or just instructor users. I do understand the feedback. We do hear that often. Appreciate you calling that out here as well. And if anyone would like to share more about their journey from outbound to outbound device prep, would like more guidance, I'd love to hear more, because it's something we are looking into providing more formalized prescriptive guidance about as well. So it'd be good to hear everyone's experience.
And thanks for putting that link up, aka.ms/Intune feedback. And another great place to add feedback is going into the Windows enrollment in the Intune Admin Center and click the add feedback in the top right-hand corner. That is not a black hole. That is actually something that we do look at, the feedback that comes through the Intune Admin Center. But again, aka.ms Intune feedback. Give us your use cases and give us that feedback on why certain things are important to you. Okay, we got a question that came from a new member in Tech Community, so welcome. Thank you for joining us for this. Are there any improvements planned for device naming? We are seeing 100 out of 100 machine enrollments, at least 2 to 5 devices are having the same device name, which is making manual activity for IT to rename the device every month. And I know I get this question a lot. One thing that Intune doesn't really care about is the device name. It goes by object IDs instead. But IT admins are humans, and they want the device name to be something that makes sense. So any improvements planned for device naming? And we'll start off with the traditional autopilot, but also an autopilot device prep. Rob, I see you were nodding your head there.
Well, I was nodding because, as I was prepping the answer to this question, I was answering a different question, because it sounds like this person is doing... No. It sounds like this person is doing exactly what we would preach, and like, hey, don't care about the machine names. Like, just let the Ubi generated of desktop blah 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 apply. Machine names is an interesting one in terms of like the canonical and ubiquitousness of how device names became a thing. But as you say, Joe, as you move to cloud native with Entra and Intune, neither of those care about unique names. In Active Directory, you needed a unique name because that was the identifying mark. But as you say, Entra and Intune don't care. But what
imagine how many Rob's mobile phone you would have in your average company, right? If the name had to be unique, you would only the first Rob could ever enroll his phone, and then that would be it.
But what it sounds like here is that this person is hitting name clashes in small groups for the randomly generated name, and like I'm trying to figure out whether that's what would be causing that. But it's an interesting one for sure. You can allow the user to set the name. Most organizations stop that. And as I was prepping to answer the question, most people are wanting to, hey, how can I give it my super special secret name that needs a decoder ring at the back of my head? I don't know if you've got any idea, Maggie.
I'm curious what people are looking for or what do they like, because with Autopilot, the approach we have today is there's a template that usually is a combination of a custom string plus something like the serial number, so you can end with in reality with non-unique names. But then I'm also curious, would you be willing to name each device individually, or would that be more manual as well? Is there anything else you're looking for specifically? I'd be curious to hear more feedback on how you'd like that process to go through, given how you're set up with your organization and what IT teams have. Is there another tool maybe they'll be using and all that?
Yeah, I get a lot of my customers are using a PowerShell script. They just deploy the script during the Autopilot process, and it runs through and it does some kind of a unique name based on a location attribute or something like that. But there's always something in the PowerShell script, and I'm curious as to why, if you have tried that, why it's not working for you, and if you haven't tried it, why you haven't tried it yet. So I'd love some more information on that.
Yeah, well, the negative side of the PowerShell script is that it can only apply after enrollment.
Sure.
Because it has to come down. So for people who would really want the rename to be happening before enrollment so that you avoid a reboot, or maybe some things get connected to your name, and changing the name has impact on licensing for certain software. Like in those cases, that won't be a good option. That's something we hear often. And what I hear often as well with device preparation, because we don't have rename there yet. So.
Yep. All right, thanks. And we have a question that came on Tech Community about rerunning Autopilot, maybe your Autopilot reset or running Autopilot for some other reason. But how do we know if we need to delete a device from Intune before running Autopilot again? This is in regards to using self-deploying mode. Our main docs article mentions this as a requirement, but then a later article mentions certain hardware manufacturers have fixed this. So sometimes I may need to delete a device, and sometimes I may not need to delete a device. How do I know when I'm going to run an Autopilot for a second time?
Yeah, so with self-deploying mode, the change that was added a while back was to ensure that only certain vetted devices can run self-deploying mode multiple times. There are some changes that were added to ensure that when the device switches tenants, customers, then the other customer cannot run self-deploying just with the previous customer's information. That was the goal of this change. The result is that we needed OEMs to do certain actions to be able to support this functionality, and not all OEMs have onboarded to that at this time. So best option would be to check with your OEM and with your device manufacturer and see if they support this. Alternatively, you can try out and see the results. And to clarify, you don't necessarily need to delete the device. You need to unblock it, which you can do from the Intune console. You don't have to fully delete it, deregister, re-register, but you will need to unblock it if an OEM is not supported. I would say many of our device hardware manufacturers that are used more broadly are supported for this, but it's best that you check with your device manufacturers. And it's safe to assume that if a certain hardware manufacturer supports this, all of their devices will be supported.
Thanks so much. Rob, go ahead. No, nothing. Because the question mentions our main Autopilot docs pages, I just want to throw that out there. It's aka.ms Windows Autopilot docs. So again, if you go to aka.ms/Windows Autopilot docs or Autopilot docs, I think they both work. You'll get to our main pages where you then can see all of our scenarios and all the how-tos and all the different things you can do with Autopilot, including resetting the device. All right, so we have a question from Hey16, who joined us a lot in our Windows Office hours and in these AMAs. So thank you for your support, Hey16, 16K. On Tech Community, they ask, how can we set Intune apps as required without installing them during autopilot, traditional autopilot. So they don't try to install before autopilot is finished. Each time an app is set to required, we would have to retest our autopilot sequence, as sometimes apps cause issues with or they break autopilot. Sometimes we do not want very big apps, for example, AutoCAD, and I have my own comments on AutoCAD that I'll talk about after we get some answers here, attempting to install and holding up the autopilot process. Maggie, how can I make sure that the apps are set to required? They're required for the device, but I don't actually want them installing during autopilot.
Well, first off, it's great to hear that our customers are interested in not installing those large apps and keeping the user there for longer. That's absolutely what we've been trying to preach for a while now. So it's great to see you're actually caring as well as much about your user experience, and you are willing to leave some of the larger software to install at the desktop. With the enrollment status page, so with Autopilot V1, if you use the enrollment status page, you can pick a list of the apps you want to install during Autopilot, and only those will install during the Autopilot phase. The rest will install in the desktop. There's a block for all option, and there is a block for certain apps, for certain selected apps that you can select. So use that option. It may be a bit more cumbersome because you have to pick each one app one by one, but it does give you that flexibility of choosing which apps to come down during Ubi versus later the desktop.
I love talking about, I'm sorry, Rob, I'll get to you in just a second. I love talking about AutoCAD because that's the big one that everyone talks about. But so I did my own little research, and this is a couple of years ago, so maybe things have changed, but Autodesk doesn't actually support installing AutoCAD during using an MDM provider, regardless of the MDM provider. At the time, Autodesk didn't support that. Our customers, of course, are doing it anyway, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Rob, go ahead so you can finish off Maggie's answer.
I was just going to plus one to what Maggie said about, not wanting to put it in an Ubi, and just to call out for optional apps as well. I speak to admins all the time who obsessed with getting all the apps down and having them set to required and kind of managing that every little experience. But customers that have moved to optional apps and having the users go self-select the ones, obviously there's core apps that the user absolutely needs, but having software catalog through Software Center, through Company Portal, huge boon for the users, and it just streamlines the apps that are on the device, reduces the patching implications for those infrequently used apps, and it maybe once upon a time users were not familiar or comfortable with finding software, but everybody has one of these in their pocket, and finding a piece of the app that the user wants is kind of second nature. So it's definitely, as people move to cloud native and having to repackage their apps and do apps differently anyway, it's a good opportunity to kind of think about how you do things for your users and kind of streamline the experience through optional software within the organization.
Yeah, thanks for expanding on that. It's a great point, and Maggie made it as well. I have a lot of my customers, they want to put everything on the device before the user ever sees their desktop. And then they say, why is it taking 3 hours for Autopilot to complete? It's because you wanted everything on the device before the user saw their desktop. And some things they're only going to use once a quarter. They don't need it on the device unless today happens to be the last day of the quarter. All right, so Rob, we have this question. I'm going to throw to you first. It's from Terry, and it has to do with our cloud native journey. Question from Terry on Tech Community. When using Autopilot for Entra-only devices, or what we call cloud-native devices, I can select to rename the device using the serial variable. That option isn't available when using Autopilot for hybrid join devices. I have to rename using some random variable and then rename the device later, which creates multiple objects in Entra. Is this something that's maybe we're going to take a look at later on? And I assume the question from Terry is, during hybrid joined Autopilot, will we consider the renaming option or naming template option?
So quick answer on the actual question. The reason is down to how the hybrid join process works during Ubi. It's like Windows doesn't support a device going from Entra joined to hybrid joined. So when you hybrid join a device in Autopilot, there's some orchestration going on to do the domain join, and then it does the reboot, and then it can finish off with the hybrid connection. So it's just to do with the orchestration of that. In terms of the second bit of the question of, hey, is that something that we're going to go fix? Almost definitely not. it's not, I don't make any bones about my hatred of hybrid during autopilot and provisioning. The destination that we're asking customers and telling customers to move to as they go through that journey is Intune only and is Entra only. That's our cloud native definition. Hybrid is great for your existing devices and uplifting those that are already connected to Active Directory and probably SCCM or another provider. Hybrid is great for getting you into the cloud world and getting you the benefit of things like Intune management and Windows Hello for Business and all of the cloud capabilities that the customers are looking to move to. But yeah, hybrid during autopilot is not recommended really. And really, if you're still in a position where you need to deploy hybrid machines, my piece of advice would be leave that provisioning where they are. Go focus on the users or the business groups that you can get to cloud native. Go solve the dependencies that are keeping you on-prem with hybrid, and then move those devices and those users over to cloud native through a refresh when those users have kind of been rationalized with whatever reason. And then it's also probably worth kind of calling out some of the misconceptions we see around hybrid. And it's kind of Microsoft's fault because we have about 50 billion different definitions of hybrid, and if you wait a minute, it'll be 50 billion and one. But you can be a true cloud native device, and your user can still be synced from on-prem. So pretty much everyone at Microsoft has some record that is syncing from Active Directory, just from the fact that we're a 50-year-old company and we've had Active Directory for a long time. And also you can be a hybrid user. You can be in and out of an office, you can be on-prem, you can connect to on-prem resources, even legacy things like file servers and print servers and things like that. So you can still connect to those even though you're on a true cloud native device. And often see a little bit of confusion there because, well, we have users that are in the office, we need to be connected to Active Directory. Really isn't the case. There's very few reasons that actually connect devices for need an Active Directory, and they're typically tied to things like legacy apps that are doing LDAP queries that are expecting the device to be in a particular group or anything like that. So the cloud native, definitely the recommended approach. Entra only, Intune only, leave the hybrid devices on-prem and use the existing processes and go focus the efforts on the cloud native journey, then bring everyone over.
Thanks, Rob. And you can see the link we have on the screen right now, aka.ms/cloud native endpoints. We talk about everything Rob just talked about, our recommendations, and the fact that just because they're accessing an on-prem app or an on-prem file server doesn't mean it has to be a hybrid device. We still, we still support our cloud native or Entra joined devices to access those on-prem resources, with the off chance that it, there might be one or two exceptions to that, but for the most part. And we talk about all that at aka.ms cloud native endpoints. All right, we got this question from Benjamin on LinkedIn, talking about device naming, of course. We're very generic. It seemed that most of the policies and apps would be assigned based on user personas and not device, but things like AutoPatch are device-specific assignments. And without naming a device, it can be very difficult to break things out into rings for testing, and managing a list of devices manually is not scalable. So the point there, I believe, and I think that's more of a point from Benjamin than a question, where we say device name is less important in Intune because it's really the object ID. But as I'm breaking out my autopilot or my AutoPatch deployment rings, I may want to say this location is in ring 1 and this location is in ring 2. And without an actual human name to the device, it's hard to determine where those devices are. Rob?
Yeah. So great that you're doing generic naming. Love it. Like it's definitely it sets you on the path to kind of what you get into the second part of the question of like not micromanaging the estate and letting things just flow and having policies in place. It kind of touches. I don't hate labels, like the idea of customers needing to know what devices, what groups the devices are in, or logical grouping. I completely get that, and it's the naming that's kind of the interesting thing. Like naming a device was never intended to be a label for a device. It's just that someone probably 25 years ago was like, hey, let's just go name the device, and that gives it a label because it was just virtue of it being an editable field on a device. And over the 20 odd years, however, since it was someone decided to do that, it's just become kind of law. And the names get super complex. So it's an imperfect but very common implementation for labeling. So completely get the scenario of labeling. The interesting thing you call out there is auto patch, because auto patch is really meant to help without you having to put those in those groups. Typically, you might have VIP devices or devices that you want to not have in those early rings, but the auto patch setup does allow for you to create those. So without knowing more about the exact scenario of how many devices you're trying to group, it's hard to give the specific feedback. But auto patch does have capabilities of processing. Definitely do this first and definitely do this last, and then it just creates all the rings in between and allows your updates just to flow.
All right, thanks, Rob. And again, we do get that sometimes you want a human name as part of your device names, and and it makes sense for some companies, and some companies, again, I love the fact also they're using generic names, because your business or your specific IT staff doesn't need that human type of name for the device. We got a question from tech community from Fred, who I haven't talked to in many years, probably. Yes, it's been too long. Intune, Autopilot, Azure has object IDs. When scripting processes, object IDs are a bit of a challenge. Are there any plans to make working with these object IDs easier, or do you have any tips for now? Maggie, I think I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Rob for that one.
Yeah, that's not something we've been looking at. I guess, are you wondering if there will be another property maybe that you can use more easily, as opposed to having to work with the object IDs there? Because with the object IDs, I don't see how we can necessarily make them more easy. If the question is, are we going to have fewer objects out there? That is something we can look into. And actually, we do want to make this a bit simpler with Autopilot device preparation. But in terms of any additional properties, again, I'd like to hear more about what exactly you're looking for, what your scripts are doing today, and what system would you like to have in place in order to make this easier to manage.
I look at that as, when I was in IT, and I've been at Microsoft for 13 years, so it's been a while since I've had to actually manage a staff, and it was SCCM at the time, configuration manager now. But I would do things like I would name based on, I'm in the Boston area, so BOS might be part of the name, and so I would have a script that looks for, if your name contains BOS, then run this. If your name contains PRO, run this. I think it's might be something like that, where now it's object IDs, and it's a lot harder to run those scripts, or to say, if within a single script, if your object ID contains run this, if your object ID contains run this. It might be a little bit harder to do that. That's the way I look at that question, if that helps clarify anything. Rob, do you have any comments on that? Because you're also been talking about the object ID quite a bit in this last 40 minutes or so.
Well, I was reading object IDs as like the GUIDs, and I think that's where Maggie was
Okay.
thinking about. And I think maybe it's more to do with unifying objects in different systems, maybe. And I think that's what Maggie was getting at with like Autopilot device registration versus Entra versus Intune. But no, nothing to add, unfortunately.
All right, thanks. If you want to give some more context to that, we'd be glad to go back to that afterwards. We got a question from Mirko on LinkedIn. The assignment of apps to specific target devices. In Configuration Manager, we can create a collection with device user limitations and apply the deployment only to those devices. But if we want to achieve the same in Intune, what's the best option currently available? Any planned improvements in the future? What I mean is, I would like to deploy an application only to new devices without using scripts, complex exclusions, or spending too much time analyzing logs. It's another longer question. So yeah, in Configuration Manager, we'd create a collection, and we would apply devices or users to the collection based on whatever we want. It was just a query based. In Intune, it's a little more complex than that. So is there an easy way to achieve the same thing in Intune, or do you have any recommendations for that, Rob?
So I think it comes again down to the change in like the pivot in how to do things. Like Intune and SCCM are deliberately different approaches, and a lot of the the benefits and the TCO and the simplification, and again, going back to, hey, don't micromanage the estate. That change in the approach is kind of crucial. And the question starts about device targeting. Intune is very explicitly, user targeting first. Shared groups or reused groups of users, based on profile or user role or whatever makes sense for your organization, so that you can reuse those groups of users. Like, this group has this particular set of apps, so when you come to add a new app, targeting those reused groups minimizes your maintenance there. And then the question kind of rotates into talking about new devices. So Maggie talked about how you can ensure that certain apps get installed during provisioning in Autopilot using the ESP feature for blocking apps. So that's where I'd look at for putting those really crucial apps. But again, as we said at the beginning, minimizing the apps that you are putting into the provisioning flow is definitely the best way. It's the best experience for your users. Again, it's a huge change in how you go about provisioning devices, from having them happen on a bench in imaging to drop shipping to the user, and the user gets to unbox it. But really, the best user experience comes from minimizing what gets put down. Security apps are non-negotiable, and then there's going to be some productivity apps to go layer on top. So yeah, that definitely, like, I feel a bit bad giving this as the answer, but like, rethinking how you do things, approaching Intune with an SCCM mindset is really not the best way to go about it, because you end up trying to square peg round hole. So embrace the change and embrace the TCO reduction and the simplification that comes with it. But yeah, definitely a pivot to user targeting would be my recommendation there.
Thanks, Rob. And I'm going to expand on something you had just said about, managing Intune with a configuration manager mindset. I have customers that have tried to basically put configuration manager in the cloud. They want to redo configuration manager in the cloud. And oddly, I had one customer, I had someone in the field reach out to me. Their customer actually wants to add a configuration manager to the cloud. They want to spin up servers in Azure and move their configuration manager environments into the cloud, like literally move it to the cloud. So that's not what Intune is, right? Intune is not cloud-based configuration manager, it's cloud-based device management. So how you go about doing that device management is a cloud method, not a configuration manager method, just happens to be delivered from the cloud. And I think it's an important distinction. We got another question from Hey16. It's an expansion on the last question. Thank you for answering my question about required apps and using the ESP block list, Maggie. I've read on the Microsoft forums and other blogs that this block list does not prevent all required apps from installing, whether they're on the block list or not. Hence, we haven't implemented this method. What are the facts here? If I block an app during ESP, does it install? Does it not install? Is it no longer required? How does that work?
Yeah, so to clarify more there, if you are using pre-provisioning, we do attempt to install all apps even if they're not in the blocking list. That's because the whole goal there, and that's the feedback we've received, is to get as many of the apps as possible. However, if you're using user-driven mode, then you should only be getting those required apps. None of the others will be applying, at least not during UBI. They will start syncing immediately after the user gets to the desktop, but they shouldn't keep the user blocked in UBI. If that's not happening, I'd love to follow up, because that's the intended behavior.
Thanks so much. Rob, do you have anything you want to add to that? No? All right, great. We got this question from, again, I apologize if I mispronounced the name, but I'm going to say from Yes8 on Tech Community. I'm going to start with, traditionally, it sounds like Yes8's IT team blocks personal devices from enrolling in Intune. So with Autopilot Device Prep, I always recommend customers disable personal devices from enrolling in Intune, and thus Device Prep requires corporate identifiers to be uploaded into Intune. Is this the recommended approach? If so, would there be any easier way to get the corporate device identifiers uploaded into Intune? Right now, it requires you manually pull, similar to a hardware hash, and requires device intervention.
Yeah, so I'll say first, it's absolutely the right approach to guide everyone to block personal devices from enrolling. Personal here is more also referring to untrusted devices or device I don't know anything about, not necessarily like my personal device I bought from, from some store. And in those cases, yes, you will need the corporate device identifiers to be uploaded. Similarly, if you're enrolling devices through EnterJoin and you're not using Autopilot registration today. However, it is a fair comment on making things a bit easier to pull that information. One thing I'm a bit curious about is you're mentioning you need to pull manually the information from hardware hash. I'm a bit surprised by that because one thing we anticipated was that the corporate identifier as a serial model manufacturer would be information that you can easily have somewhere available, like in an asset management tool or your OEM when you're ordering the devices, you have that listed. That's not the case with hardware hash because there the information is not just readily available that someone can pass on to you. But I'm a bit surprised as well that the corporate identifiers still requires you to manually pull from each device. That being said, appreciate the feedback here. And one thing we have heard as a suggestion is, can I have just my device manufacturer maybe upload that list easily for me on my behalf so that I don't have to go through that process and get that information. So it's a fair comment, definitely, and appreciate you bringing that up.
Thanks, Maggie. And yeah, so I look at that. I remember when Autopilot was brand new, and I think there was the conversation of maybe we'll put like a QR code or something on a box, right? And so you could take a screenshot or whatever, you can take a picture of it, send it to IT, and let them deal with it. And then we started thinking about privacy. What if I happen to be walking around a big box store and I see someone with this big computer with a QR code on it, and I scan it myself before they even get to the register, and so things like that may not have panned out because of privacy concerns and security. We do have a question from Michael on Tech Community. Thank you for answering my question about blocking setup for personal accounts. To confirm, is this just Enterprise SKU that will prevent users from logging with personal accounts, or also the Pro SKU? What happens if the user attempts to log in with a personal account on either Enterprise or Pro SKU?
Yeah, so with Enterprise...
Oh,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Maggie. That's fine.
I was going to say, with the Enterprise SKU, you don't get that page of choose a personal account because it's always anticipated that this will be an enterprise user, so there's no option to go create the personal account. With the Pro SKU, because Pro SKU is something that consumer users can just go and buy, we have to have both options in there. And if the user attempts to log in with a personal account, they will go and create a personal account. They won't get their device enrolled. They could potentially enroll their device when they get to the desktop through the settings app. That's not really the recommended method or the method that you'd like to have, I'm sure. So they'll have to reset, go back and run through the process again if they want to get the Autopilot experience.
Go ahead, Rob.
Nothing to add.
It's interesting too, Maggie, because Autopilot, typically speaking, Autopilot runs during a Pro SKU, and then we get the uplift once the user logs in, the licensed user logs in. So I think that might be where Michael is going as well. If I'm on a Pro SKU, I'm going to have that page until my enterprise user logs in, and then it automatically up SKUs itself to enterprise, and that may be where Michael was going with that. All right, we had a question.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are buying your Pro SKUs and you're using a policy.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
Sorry, Rob, were you going to say something?
No, you finish, Maggie, and then I'll jump in. I think we've hit some lag issues again. Go ahead, Maggie.
No, go ahead, Rob. I think I was done. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to clarify, Joe, the comment Maggie made earlier about enterprise, that's kind of not that's not a long-term solution. That's just a hey, device prep doesn't currently have a registration equivalent, so you can't go customize Ubi ahead of time. Today in Autopilot, registration based, you have that ability to hide the personal login. So if you're using device prep and want to prevent login, go use an enterprise SKU. At some point in the future, we'll have a solution for that that's kind of the equivalent to Autopilot V1. So it's not you'll have to go use enterprise SKU because there's complications with enterprise SKU for drop shipping of devices.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Maggie, for expanding on that. So we got a question from KMeta1232 on Tech Community. When are you planning to add export capabilities in the Autopilot blade, which consists of the Azure AD or the Entra ID and serial number? Any plans on getting an export in the Autopilot devices list that includes the Entra ID and serial number?
Yeah, we don't have any plans for that yet. I'd love to understand more how important that is for your organization and how you're using that information as well. Is it more for keeping track, or are you using this for something else? But we don't have that planned at this time.
Yeah, I would say more than likely your CMDB probably has that information as well, and we've talked about that a little bit. But again, as Maggie's asking, please give us that feedback at aka.ms/Intune feedback. Go to the Windows Enrollment Blade within the Intune Admin Center, click the feedback button in the top right corner, make sure we get that feedback, why that's important to you, how you plan to use that functionality.
And I'd expect, I've not looked at the device export, I was going to say in a while, but probably ever. But I'd be surprised if they're not in there. Like AAD suggests that the device is registered and enrolled. So like the device blade export might have the capabilities that you need. But if not, provide that feedback, and everything Joe said still stands.
Yeah, I was thinking either from the Entra portal, you probably get that, or even from Graph APIs, you could probably get that. Give us that feedback. Let us know how you plan to use that. If it's not in Graph, that may be something that we can look at later on as well. All right, I think this might be our final question. We have a question from Randy on Tech Community, and we we get this all the time, Randy. So thank you for bringing it up here, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about this. We really need an order of installation for ESP applications. Will we ever have this capability? Advice on how to approach this until we have this capability. Maggie, I'll start with you on that one. I was actually waiting for this question, so thank you for asking, Randy.
That's an interesting one that comes from time to time. We keep hearing about it. Every time we hear about this, we are always asking, tell us more. Why do you need this? Why is this blocking for you? Do you need to control the order? Is it more about the reliability or the predictability of the experience and knowing that certain things will come in a specific order for your user? Do you need this more for a report maybe where you want to see how the apps actually applied, like the actual order they applied in? And to what extent do you need to control this as well? What is it there that things like supersedence, dependencies do not cover already that you'd need this for? It's not an immediate priority on our list. We do have that in our backlog. We have been talking about this, discussing this. I don't have any timeline for this yet, though, because we're not yet working on it. But I'm always interested in learning more and understanding a bit more of these flavor, so to say, of the scenarios where this might be needed and what the true need is there and how much customization do you want? Because it's our intention to make the cloud experience easier, not just rebuild config manager.
Thanks so much, Maggie. And Rob, before we do final thoughts, do you have anything you want to add to that question? Order of installations?
Yeah, not anything that we can cover in the next 60 seconds, but yeah, it's something Maggie and I talk about pretty much in every one of our one-on-ones. We definitely want to solve the business outcome that you need to achieve. But as Maggie says, we don't want to go recreate task sequencing in Autopilot because we think that's going to make for a crummy user experience of locking them down before they get to the desktop. So we're discussing it actively, and yeah, we know it's an outcome that we need to solve.
Thanks. And while we have you, Rob, any final thoughts? Just general final thoughts on today?
Just we talked about cloud native at the beginning, but yeah, definitely. Hopefully everyone is starting to or is on their journey to Intune and Entra for cloud native and beginning that transition. Maybe we can put up the link again for the cloud native endpoints to help you start that journey if you've not started. And yeah, go focus on the devices and the users that you can. And conversion didn't come up, I guess, because it's Autopilot. But as you look to move, don't worry about your existing devices. Just use Autopilot over time and age them out and naturally refresh into cloud native. It's okay that you're going to have a mixed estate of hybrid and co-managed and cloud native, and it will just solve itself over time.
Thanks so much, Rob. And again, that link was aka.ms/cloud native endpoints. Maggie, any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, if you haven't tried out Power Device Preparation, this is something I always say in these forums. Go try it out. Let us know what your experience is. See for yourself some of the changes we've done there. We do understand some of the scenarios you might still need to use traditional Autopilot for, but for user-driven, entry-joined, start with Autopilot Device Preparation. Evaluate this at the minimum. And again, appreciate all your great questions. Appreciate your feedback as well. I know we talk to many of you, but there's not everyone is always in those forums. So we use all the tools available. Provide us feedback. Just earlier, where you can provide feedback. Let us know what changes you'd like to see. We do look at them. We can't prioritize everything, obviously, but we do keep them in mind and are actively considering many of your suggestions. So appreciate your feedback.
Thanks, Maggie. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. I know it's early for some of you, late for some of you. Thanks so much. The Q&A will be open through 12 o'clock Pacific time this Friday. I don't know the date of this Friday, but this Friday. Keep your questions coming. Nice and easy if you close out this tab, aka.ms/AMA/autopilot. Next up, in just a few minutes, our next Ask Microsoft Anything is coming up on Windows updates and driver management. That's at 9 a.m. Pacific time, again, just a couple of minutes. And you can visit us there at aka.ms/AMA/Windows updates. We'll see you soon.